She was sitting quietly in her seat, flipping through a book, when it all started. A routine flight from New York to California. Everything seemed to be going smoothly as the plane taxied down the runway. The hum of the engines, a soothing rhythm. Her name was Maya Williams, an entrepreneur and a powerhouse in the business world, though no one knew that yet. The only thing that stood out about her was the air of confidence she exuded, the kind you only see in those who've been to the top and survived the fall. The flight was set to take 5 hours, but Maya's journey would take a turn in less than an hour. It wasn't the turbulence that would shake her, nor was it the long stretch of time ahead. No, it was something far more personal, far more public, something she hadn't expected. The first thing she noticed was the tone of the flight attendant's voice. There was a slight hint of discomfort in her words, but Maya brushed it off. After all, flight attendants have to manage all sorts of personalities, right? She'd heard it all before. "Excuse me, ma'am," the flight attendant said, leaning in with a forced smile. "Could you please step into the aisle for a moment?" Maya looked up from her book, confused. She didn't know why she'd been singled out. There were other passengers, some more talkative than her, a few even less settled in their seats. But the flight attendant's gaze lingered on her for a moment too long. "Is something wrong?" Maya asked, feeling the first stirrings of unease. "Just a moment, please," the attendant replied, not meeting her eyes. "It's just a quick check." Maya wasn't sure what was happening, but she stood up, trying to shake off the feeling that something was off. She followed the attendant to the front of the cabin, trying to remain calm. When she reached the front, she was stopped by another flight attendant. He was taller than the others, his eyes dark and serious. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." "It's a security matter," the man said, his voice carrying an unsettling authority. A chill ran through her. She wasn't used to being treated like this. She knew what kind of reputation she had in her industry, and it certainly wasn't the type of reputation that would attract this kind of attention, especially on a plane. "I'm sorry," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "What's going on? Is there a problem?" The man didn't respond at first. Instead, he exchanged a brief, silent glance with the flight attendant who had approached her. Then, without saying another word, he turned and started walking toward the back of the plane. Maya's heart began to race. This wasn't a simple mistake, and it certainly wasn't a misunderstanding. Maya had been in enough high-stakes situations to recognize when something wasn't right. As she followed them down the narrow aisle, she could feel the eyes of the passengers on her. Some were curious, others whispered to each other, and a few even took out their phones, no doubt recording the moment. "Please just tell me what this is about," Maya said, trying to keep the panic from creeping into her voice. Finally, they reached the back of the plane, near the galley. A third figure, a tall security officer, was waiting for her. His uniform was pressed, his demeanor stern. He barely looked at her as he spoke. "You'll need to come with us, ma'am," he said in a clipped tone. "This is a security procedure." "What is this about?" Maya asked, her voice growing firmer. "Ma'am, you're being removed from flight," the security officer said. "We've received instructions to remove you from this aircraft." Her heart sank. She had been on countless flights. Never once had she been singled out like this. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, now thoroughly confused and increasingly upset. Before she could react, 2 other security officers appeared. They didn't seem interested in answering her questions. Instead, they just stood in place, blocking the narrow passageway, waiting for her to make a move. One of them reached out, grabbing her arm as if to guide her, but Maya pulled back instinctively. "I'm not going anywhere until you explain why I'm being treated like this," Maya said, trying to maintain her composure. The security officer holding her arm didn't flinch. "You need to cooperate, ma'am. We're just following orders." Orders. Maya was starting to feel like a pawn in someone else's game, but she didn't know who was playing it or why. She had no criminal history, no reason for suspicion. She was just a businesswoman on her way to an important meeting. Yet, here she was, being escorted off a plane with no explanation. The minutes felt like hours. Maya could feel the stares of the passengers burning into her back, the quiet whispers growing louder. Some of them had recognized her by now. She was well known in business circles. though her face wasn't as famous as her achievements. Still, being a black woman in a high-profile industry meant she often attracted attention, whether it was positive or not. She was halfway down the aisle when a voice from the front of the plane called out to her. "Maya, what's going on?" It was a man's voice, but she couldn't place it immediately. She turned and saw a familiar face, Jordan, one of her closest colleagues. He was standing up in the aisle now, looking between her and the security officers. Maya's eyes widened. "Jordan? What are you?" "Let her go," Jordan demanded, striding toward her with a sense of urgency. "What is this?" "She's got important business to attend to." But the security officers didn't back down. They had their orders, and no one seemed willing to explain why. A few tense moments passed before one of the officers turned to Maya. "We've been instructed to remove you. This is non-negotiable." Maya didn't know what to do. Her options were slim. She could put up a fight, but that would only make the situation worse. Instead, she took a deep breath, her mind racing. There was something more going on here, and it wasn't just a random security check. Someone had orchestrated this. As the officers ushered her off the plane, Jordan followed, trying to keep up. Once they were outside, standing at the gate, Maya felt a strange calm wash over her. She was now in the terminal, far from the confines of the plane. Her mind, once racing with anger and confusion, started to focus on something else, the bigger picture. Who had done this to her? Who had gone to such lengths to embarrass her publicly, to cause her to miss this flight, to remove her from a place where she was perfectly entitled to be? It didn't take long for her to find out. As she was escorted through the terminal, a woman in a business suit approached her. Maya couldn't place her at first, but when the woman spoke, her voice was icy and calculated. "You must be Maya Williams," the woman said, her eyes scanning Maya from head to toe. "I'm Claire Lawson. I work in corporate relations for the airline." Maya stared at her, still processing everything that had happened. "What is going on here? Why was I removed from my flight? What's your part in this?" Claire gave a small, almost smug smile. "You see, Ms. Williams, you've made a very powerful enemy. And unfortunately for you, enemies are often very persuasive." The pieces started to fall into place. Maya had been in the business world long enough to recognize when something wasn't right, when a rivalry was brewing in the shadows. But this was different. This was personal. Maya didn't say anything for a moment, but her eyes narrowed. She was used to being underestimated, to being pushed around by people who thought they could get away with it. But she wasn't going to let this slide. Not now, not ever. "What do you want from me?" Maya asked, her voice steady but full of determination. The woman, Claire, took a step closer, lowering her voice as though she were sharing a secret. "We want you to stay out of the media spotlight. We don't need your kind of attention right now. You see, your presence, your influence, is dangerous to us." Maya's stomach dropped. She had known there was more to this, but she hadn't expected this level of manipulation. She'd built her career on innovation, on fighting for what she believed in. She wasn't the type to back down. Not when it came to something like this. "I'm not going anywhere," Maya said, her voice rising with conviction. At that moment, her phone buzzed. It was an alert. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw what it was, a news article titled, "Airline's Shocking Treatment of Business Mogul Maya Williams." The article was everywhere. News outlets were picking it up. The story was already spiraling into a public relations nightmare for the airline. Maya knew exactly what she had to do next. She wasn't just going to walk away from this. She wasn't going to let them tarnish her reputation. But instead of fighting them on their terms, Maya would fight back on her own. And she would do it in the only way that made sense. The next few weeks would be a whirlwind. What happened next would shock the world, and the airline would soon realize the full weight of their mistake. Maya wasn't just a businesswoman. They just pulled the wrong person off that plane. As the story of her unjust removal gained momentum, something bigger began to unfold. Maya wasn't just going to expose the airline's mistreatment. She was going to leverage it. And she had one card in her hand that no one could predict. She wasn't just going to get revenge. She was going to get something far more powerful. for $1 billion in funding, backed by the very industry they had tried to suppress her in. But how she would go about it, no one had a clue. The next few days were a blur of media attention, legal meetings, and phone calls. The story of Maya's removal from the flight had exploded, becoming an international sensation. What had started as a small issue in an airplane cabin had quickly spiraled into a full-blown PR nightmare for the airline. News outlets, social media platforms, and even influencers were sharing Maya's story, expressing outrage at the blatant mistreatment of a successful black woman in business. Maya, once just an entrepreneur working behind the scenes, was now the face of a movement for justice, equity, and corporate accountability. But Maya wasn't interested in the spotlight. The media frenzy was, in her eyes, just the beginning. She had always been a woman of action, and now she saw a new opportunity. An opportunity to turn her anger into leverage, to make a statement, and, most importantly, to secure the future of her next big business venture. She wasn't just going to take down the airline for what they'd done to her. She was going to take advantage of their mistake in a way no one would ever see coming. They had underestimated her, and that was a mistake they would come to regret. It didn't take long for Maya to mobilize her team. Her lawyer, Reggie, was the first to step in, urging her to take a more strategic approach. He was one of the top civil rights attorneys in the country, known for his sharp mind and unflinching resolve. But even Reggie, with all his experience, knew that this was something different. Maya's case wasn't just about discrimination or a corporate faux pas. No, this was about power, influence, and reclaiming what was rightfully hers. As he sat across from her in her sleek downtown office, he could see the fire in her eyes. He could tell she was already several steps ahead of everyone else. "You're going to need more than a lawsuit, Maya," Reggie said, his voice low and deliberate. "You've got the public on your side, but they'll get tired of the drama if we don't bring something more to the table." Maya nodded, her fingers drumming rhythmically on the desk. She knew exactly what Reggie meant. Lawsuits, settlements, and public outcry were only part of the equation. She needed to make the airline's actions backfire in a way that they couldn't recover from. The key was in the timing. If she played this right, she could turn this misstep into the largest financial move of her career. And it wasn't just about revenge. It was about securing a long-term partnership with an industry that had repeatedly underestimated her. "What do you suggest?" Maya asked, leaning forward, her voice steady but filled with resolve. Reggie paused for a moment, clearly weighing his words. "You've been talking about expanding your business. You've been working on your new travel tech startup for months. I think this is the perfect opportunity to launch it. But not just as a small tech company. We turn this into a multi-million-dollar project, and we get the right backers on board, people with influence, people who can change the game." Maya's mind raced as Reggie laid out the blueprint. The airline had inadvertently provided her with an opening, one that would lead her to an entirely new level of power in the industry. The airline's treatment of her had drawn enough public outrage that now, when she came forward with a solution, her own new travel technology startup, she would have the media's attention. And not just any attention. This was the kind of attention that could pull in big investors, corporate partners, and even government contracts. It wasn't just about her. It was about making the entire industry sit up and take notice. The startup idea had been in the back of Maya's mind for years. She had spent the past decade building her company, which focused on business, consulting for other entrepreneurs in the tech sector. But her real passion had always been in the travel industry. She saw how outdated the systems were, especially when it came to airlines, airports, and their services. The inefficiencies were glaring. Travelers faced countless hurdles, delays, and communication failures, often at the expense of their time and money. There was a gap in the market, one that Maya was uniquely positioned to fill. With her vast network of contacts and her reputation for innovative thinking, she had the tools to bring a fresh perspective to the industry. But launching a company like this required massive funding, and it also required support from the right investors. Investors who weren't just looking for a quick return, but were willing to think long-term. Maya knew how to talk to people like that. She had worked with high-net-worth individuals, venture capitalists, and influencers in her previous ventures. But this was going to be different. This time, she would need to bring in more than just investors. She needed backers with deep pockets and a genuine interest in shaking up the status quo. And who better than the very airline that had wronged her? Maya sat back in her chair, a slow smile curling on her lips. "I see what you mean," she said, her voice calm but filled with quiet power. "It's time to make this personal." Reggie gave her a sharp look, as if sensing the shift in her demeanor. "Are you sure you want to take this route? Going after them this hard could alienate potential backers, especially those who might be skeptical about a woman who's trying to turn a PR disaster into a billion-dollar deal." Maya's gaze hardened. "They wanted to make an example of me. Now, I'm going to make an example of them. The public's already on my side. We've got the leverage. Let's use it." Reggie nodded, his face a mask of thought. "I'll start working on the legal aspects. We can go after them for wrongful removal, and I'll gather all the information we need. But you need to get those investors on board. The sooner you move, the better." Maya turned her attention to the phone on her desk, tapping it lightly. She already had a list of people in mind, some who owed her favors, others who had always admired her work from afar. She needed investors who not only had money, but were willing to challenge the current paradigm in the travel industry. And she knew just where to start. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings and conference calls. Maya met with some of the biggest names in venture capital, all while keeping her cards close to her chest. To the public, she was simply a woman wronged by a powerful airline seeking justice. But to those who knew her in the business world, Maya was already laying the foundation for something far bigger than anyone could imagine. The media caught wind of her meetings, her calls for transparency, and her promises to overhaul the travel experience. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for an entire industry. Meanwhile, the airline, still reeling from the backlash, was desperately trying to control the damage. Their PR teams were scrambling to put out fires, but nothing they did seemed to make a dent in the growing outrage. Maya's name was everywhere, her story spreading faster than they could shut it down. The public wasn't just angry, they were passionate. They were demanding that the airline be held accountable for their actions. The airline's CEO, Greg Thompson, had been following the situation closely. From his office in the company's sprawling headquarters, he watched the media storm unfold with growing frustration. He had been blindsided by Maya's sudden rise to prominence, especially given how small an issue it seemed at first. But now it was clear, Maya wasn't going away, and she was no longer just a businesswoman. She was a symbol, a rallying cry for everyone who had ever felt mistreated by corporations. In a private meeting with his board of directors, Greg made his frustration known. "We can't just ignore this," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Maya Williams is everywhere. She's making us look like fools. We need to contain this. Fast." But it was already too late. The longer the airline tried to control the narrative, the worse the situation became. Meanwhile, Maya's plans were falling into place. She had already secured several meetings with major investors, and some of the biggest names in the venture capital world were now interested in her startup. The airline's actions had inadvertently opened a door that Maya had been waiting for. And this time, she wasn't just going to walk through it. She was going to burst through it. 1 week later, Maya sat in a penthouse boardroom overlooking the city, a group of venture capitalists surrounding her. Their faces were serious, but there was an energy in the room. Maya had spent hours preparing for this moment, and it was clear that her story had captivated them. They had listened to her pitch, asked questions, and discussed her vision for the future of travel. The mood had shifted in her favor, and it was now a matter of making the deal happen. "We're in," one of the investors said, breaking the silence. "We believe in you, Maya. We'll back you, and we'll make sure the rest of the industry takes notice. You're about to change the game." And just like that, the airline's blunder had turned into a $4 billion deal. Maya had not only taken revenge, she had seized the opportunity to build something far greater than anyone had ever expected. The airline, once her enemy, had unknowingly helped her secure the future she had always dreamed of. And as Maya looked around the room, she knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. As the deal was finalized, Maya could hardly believe how quickly everything had shifted. In a matter of days, she had gone from being a victim of a corporate misstep to the owner of a burgeoning tech empire, poised to disrupt the very industry that had tried to silence her. The magnitude of the situation began to sink in as she sat alone in her penthouse office, staring out over the city skyline. This wasn't just about money or success, it was about proving a point. It was about making sure that no one, especially a corporation, ever underestimated her again. She had turned an egregious wrong into an opportunity that would change the travel industry forever. The media storm surrounding her only intensified. Headlines no longer painted her as a victim, but as a powerful businesswoman who had turned adversity into triumph. Social media accounts flooded with praise for Maya's resilience and her ability to use her experience to create something that would benefit millions of travelers. The hashtag Maya Moves was trending, and she found herself invited to talk shows, interviews, and panel discussions across the country. People wanted to hear her story. They wanted to know how she had managed to stay composed, even as she was dragged off that plane. But despite all the attention, Maya remained focused. Her startup, which she had dubbed Revolve Tech, was already gaining traction. She had surrounded herself with an all-star team of developers, strategists, and executives who were dedicated to bringing her vision to life. Revolve Tech wasn't just another travel tech company. It was a complete overhaul of how airlines, airports, and passengers interacted. Her company would create an integrated, seamless travel experience that addressed all the pain points people faced when flying. Everything from ticketing and check-ins to baggage claims and customer service. But it was more than just about making travel more efficient. It was about restoring trust between passengers and the companies that serve them. Maya's leadership style was unorthodox. While most CEOs of tech companies were known for their analytical minds and rigid approaches to business, Maya was different. She understood people, their needs, and their frustrations. She knew that at the core of the travel experience was the human element, the people who worked at the airports, the flight attendants, the ground crew. Revolve Tech wasn't going to be just a technology company. It was going to be a company built on empathy, with every decision made through the lens of customer experience. Maya had learned firsthand how a lack of empathy could destroy trust, and she wasn't about to make the same mistake. As Revolve Tech's funding and visibility grew, Maya's next move was clear. She needed to go straight to the heart of the airline industry and show them just how much power the people had when they came together. She knew that she couldn't do it alone, so she began reaching out to other like-minded entrepreneurs, community leaders, and activists who shared her vision of a better, more equitable travel experience. Together, they could create a coalition that would force the industry to change. Revolve Tech's new business model wasn't just about competing with other tech startups. It was about creating a movement that would demand more from the corporations that had long been in control. Her first target was, of course, the airline that had wronged her. Maya was strategic. She knew that if she confronted them head-on, they would likely retaliate or try to discredit her. Instead, she chose to hit them where it hurt the most, where they least expected it. She initiated a series of high-profile collaborations with major airport hubs, promising them access to Revolve Tech's advanced technology in exchange for a seat at the table when it came to negotiating new industry standards. Maya's reputation was growing rapidly, and her business acumen was becoming undeniable. By the time she was done, she wasn't just going after one airline. She was targeting the entire industry. As her startup gained momentum, Maya's influence reached far beyond the world of travel. She was asked to speak at major tech conferences, to lead discussions on business ethics, and even to share her story as a keynote speaker at women's empowerment events. Maya had become a symbol of what it meant to rise from the ashes of adversity and fight for something bigger than herself. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about legacy. She was no longer just a businesswoman. She was a catalyst for change. But despite her outward success, Maya couldn't escape the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Her mind often wandered back to that moment on the plane, to the feeling of helplessness and humiliation. The memory still stung, no matter how far removed she was from it. She had turned that pain into something productive, something positive. But it didn't change the fact that she had been treated unfairly. And while her business had flourished, there was still a part of her that longed for closure. It wasn't enough to have secured $4 billion in funding. It wasn't enough to have launched a multi-million-dollar company. Maya needed to make sure that the people who had wronged her would never, ever forget her name. It wasn't long before Maya received a phone call from the airline's CEO, Greg Thompson. She had been expecting it. He was desperate. Maya's success had already begun to hurt their bottom line. Her innovative approach was causing some of their most loyal customers to reconsider their loyalty. The time for public relations damage control had passed. Now, they were playing for real. "I'm sure you're aware of the situation," Greg said, his voice low and controlled. "I'm not going to pretend that things went well between us. But I think it's time we sit down and talk about how we can move forward. We'd like to make amends." Maya didn't hesitate. She had been waiting for this moment, and now it was time to use her leverage. "I don't think you can fix what's broken," she said, her tone calm but firm. "But I'm willing to listen. Let's meet tomorrow." The meeting took place at Revolve Tech's headquarters, in one of the building's sleek, glass-walled conference rooms. Greg Thompson arrived with a small entourage of high-level executives, their faces grim. They had no choice but to be there. But Maya wasn't intimidated. She had already won. Greg wasted no time. "We understand the gravity of what happened," he began, "and we're prepared to offer you a settlement, financial compensation for the incident, as well as a partnership between our airline and Revolve Tech. We believe there's an opportunity here for both of us to benefit. You'll have access to our fleet and our customer base, and we'll invest in your tech company." Maya listened carefully, weighing his words. She had expected this. The airline was trying to buy her off, to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. But she knew the game had changed. She no longer needed their money or their support. She had become a force unto herself. She leaned back in her chair and smiled, the kind of smile that made Greg feel uneasy. "I appreciate the offer, Greg," Maya said slowly. "But you're missing the point. This isn't about a settlement or a partnership. It's about accountability. And it's about showing the world that the people, the ones who get pushed around, can win. You don't get to buy that." The room fell silent. Greg's face reddened, but Maya's gaze never wavered. She had the upper hand. "You made your choice when you pulled me off that plane," she continued. "And now I'm making mine. Revolve Tech is going to change the industry, and it's going to do so without your help. I don't need your partnership. I don't need your apology. But what I do need is for you to acknowledge that what you did was wrong. And I want the world to know it." The meeting ended with no resolution, no compromise. Maya had made her statement loud and clear. She didn't need the airline or their money. What she had built was stronger than any corporation's efforts to undermine her. As Greg and his team left the conference room, Maya stood at the window, watching them go. She had won, not just the battle, but the war. In the weeks that followed, Revolve Tech's success grew exponentially. The technology Maya had envisioned began to take shape, revolutionizing the way the travel industry operated. Her platform was adopted by airports across the globe, and her customer-focused model became the new gold standard. Airlines that had once dismissed her now had no choice but to adapt to her innovations. Revolve Tech had forced them to evolve, and Maya had become the industry's most powerful voice.